The reluctant choice. Vera, the alien queen, stood on the balcony of her palace, looking out at the endless stars that filled the sky. She had always felt powerful, proud of her race, and the rich history of her people. Her species was the mightiest in the galaxy. They were strong, wise, and feared by all. So when the Galactic Council demanded that she take a human mate, she was furious. She couldn't understand why it was necessary. The humans were weak, small, and unimportant, at least that's what she thought. She had never met a human she respected. How could a species so fragile be her equal? But the council was insistent. It wasn't just about diplomacy, they said. It was about forging an alliance, a powerful union that would benefit all of the galaxy's races. And after much pressure, Vera finally agreed, but she vowed it would only be a political formality, a mere agreement, nothing more. She would choose the weakest human she could find, someone who would never challenge her, and this would be the end of it. Vera was not interested in love or any emotional connection. She had more important matters to attend to, but when she first laid eyes on Kale, the human chosen for her, she felt a strange, unexpected feeling stir within her. It wasn't fear, it was curiosity, and she hated it. She didn't want to be curious about this human, but something in his gaze made her wonder, what was it about him that made her feel so unsettled? Kale stood tall, though he was much shorter than Vera. His eyes were full of strength, and despite his size, he didn't seem afraid. He held himself with a quiet confidence that was hard to ignore. His dark hair and strong build were a stark contrast to her own pale features. He was a warrior in his own right, but not one Vera thought could ever match her power. She had always been the strongest, the best, the most feared, and no human, no matter how brave, could change that. Yet, as they stood facing each other, Vera noticed something that had never happened before. She wasn't the one in control. For the first time in her life, she felt uncertain. It made her angry, and she quickly pushed that feeling away. This was just another mission, just another duty, nothing more. So why was it so hard to focus? As the days passed, Vera and Kale spent more time together, but it wasn't easy for her. She didn't want to get to know him. She didn't want to connect with him in any way. She tried to remain distant, cold, and unemotional. But Kale was different. He was patient, kind even. He never pushed her, never tried to force a connection. He simply respected her space, and in the moments when she did speak to him, she found that he listened, truly listened, something no one else had ever done before. Vera found herself thinking about him more than she should have. His quiet strength, his calm demeanor, it was all so strange to her, yet there was something about it that made her feel intrigued. One evening, after a long day of diplomatic talks, Vera found herself alone with Kale in the palace gardens. It was a rare moment of peace, and she didn't know why, but she allowed herself to relax, just for a moment. Kale was standing near the fountain, his eyes focused on the water. "You don't have to do this," she said suddenly, her voice cold, but there was a softness in her tone. Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Do what, Your Majesty?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. This union, it's just a formality, you know that, don't you?" Vera felt a pang in her chest as she spoke, and she quickly covered it up with a scowl. Kale's lips curled into a small smile. "I know," he said simply, "but it doesn't have to be a bad thing, does it?" Vera didn't know how to respond to that. She had always believed that emotions were a weakness, that feelings only got in the way of what was important, but here was Kale, a human, telling her that maybe this could be something more than just a duty, that maybe, just maybe, it could be something worth having. Vera didn't want to admit it, but she was starting to wonder if he might be right, if this human might be more than she thought. But that thought scared her. She had never allowed herself to feel vulnerable, never allowed herself to care about anyone, not like this, not with him, and she didn't know what to do with these new feelings that were slowly creeping into her heart. As they stood there, in the quiet of the garden, Vera couldn't help but feel something shift, something change. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about duty, about power, she was thinking about Kale, and she didn't know what that meant for her, for them, but she knew one thing for certain, she couldn't ignore it, she couldn't pretend it wasn't there. Whatever it was real, and that scared her more than anything else. Unveiling the power. The days following their conversation in the garden were tense. Vera couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She still didn't trust Kale, not fully, but she found herself watching him more often, noticing things she hadn't before. the way he moved, the way he spoke, his calm presence in a room full of chaos, it was all so different from what she expected. He wasn't the weak, fragile human she had thought, he was a mystery, one that she had no choice but to unravel, but she refused to admit it, not yet, not until she understood what was happening inside her. One afternoon, as Vera sat in the royal training room, reviewing the latest reports, Kale entered quietly, his boots making no sound on the stone floor. He had come to report for duty, or so he said, but Vera wasn't interested in hearing it, she had far more important matters to deal with. I don't need you here, she said coldly without looking up, go and take care of the soldiers, I'll handle the rest. Kale didn't leave. He stood in silence for a moment before speaking, I can't just leave you to handle everything on your own. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a hint of something she couldn't quite place. Vera's eyes narrowed as she finally looked at him. Why? She asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Kale met her gaze, his eyes filled with something deeper. Because you're not alone anymore, he said simply, we're partners, remember? Vera blinked, surprised by his words. She hadn't expected him to say that. The thought of being partners with a human, a species she had always dismissed as weak, unsettled her, but there was something in his voice that made her question her own beliefs, something that made her want to know more. Before she could respond, the room shook suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, the walls trembled, and Vera's heart raced. She had felt that before. It was the feeling of danger, of something coming, something powerful. Vera stood quickly, her instincts kicking in. Kale's eyes went to the door, his expression hardening. Get ready, he said quietly, and to her surprise, Vera didn't hesitate, she followed his lead. They rushed outside to see what was happening, and Vera's heart sank. The royal palace was under attack, a force of enemy ships had arrived without warning, and their weapons were firing on the city. Vera's first instinct was to fight, to protect her people, but as she prepared to summon her guards, Kale stepped forward, his face serious. Let me handle this, he said, his voice steady. Vera's eyes widened. What do you mean, handle this? She demanded. This is my fight, my duty. Kale didn't respond, he simply raised his hand, and in that moment, Vera saw something she hadn't expected, something that took her breath away. A surge of energy, unlike anything she had ever felt, radiated from Kale's body. His eyes glowed with a strange light, and before Vera could react, he was gone, moving faster than she could see, his body a blur as he tore through the battlefield, his energy crackling in the air. Vera stood frozen, watching in awe as Kale fought. His power was immense, his movements graceful, yet lethal. Enemies fell before him with ease. And Vera couldn't believe what she was seeing. This wasn't the weak human she had dismissed, this was something far greater, something dangerous. Kale moved like a force of nature, his every action calculated, precise, and when he finally stopped, the battlefield was silent. The enemy forces had been wiped out in moments. Vera couldn't speak, her mind was racing. How was this possible? What had just happened? Kale turned back to her, his expression unreadable. It's done, he said simply, but Vera could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He had pushed himself to the limit, his body was covered in bruises, but he stood tall, unshaken, and it was then that Vera realized the truth. Kale wasn't just a human, he was something more, something that could change everything. For the first time, Vera felt a deep respect for him, not just for his strength, but for his courage, his willingness to fight for something greater than himself, and as she walked toward him, she couldn't help but feel a stirring inside her, a connection that was growing stronger with every passing moment. This human, this mate, was no longer just a symbol of peace, he was a partner. And Vera had no idea what to do with these new feelings, feelings she had never allowed herself to feel, not for anyone, but now, standing beside Kale, she wasn't sure she could ignore them any longer. The bond grows stronger. The days after the battle were filled with tension and uncertainty. Vera couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Kale's power had shocked her to the core. She had never expected a human to be capable of such force, such mastery, and yet, there he was, standing before her, calm and unbroken. He had saved them all, but she couldn't understand it. How could someone so small, so seemingly weak, possess such immense power? The palace was quiet. The aftermath of the attack left everyone on edge. Vera tried to bury her thoughts under a mountain of paperwork and meetings, but the memories of Kale's strength haunted her. It was not just the power he displayed in battle, it was the way he handled himself, the way he remained calm under pressure, something Vera had always prided herself on, and yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that Kale was a different kind of warrior, one who fought not just for survival, but for something more, something greater than the battle itself. It had been a week since the attack, and yet, Vera couldn't escape the thoughts of him, of Kale. She had started noticing the small things about him, his smile, his quiet humor, the way he always listened when she spoke, as though he valued her words, her thoughts, something that very few ever did, and it unsettled her. The queen, the leader, the powerful ruler, was suddenly feeling something she hadn't in years, vulnerability. She had always been in control, but Kale's presence made her question everything, question herself, and the more she fought against it, the stronger the pull became. One evening, she found herself walking the palace gardens again. It was her usual escape from the weight of her responsibilities, but tonight, she wasn't alone. Kale had quietly followed her, as he often did these days. Despite her attempts to push him away, he seemed to sense when she needed company, when she was struggling, and when she needed someone to just listen. He was there, without saying a word, without forcing anything. "Your Majesty," Kale said, his voice breaking the silence. She turned to find him standing a few feet away, his usual calm demeanor in place, but there was something different in his eyes, something more. "You've been quiet lately," he continued. "Are you all right?" Vera's heart skipped a beat. She hated how he could read her so easily, how he seemed to know exactly what was going on in her mind, something she had never allowed anyone to do before. She couldn't answer at first, so she simply nodded. "I'm fine," she said, her voice firm, but not quite convincing. Kale didn't push her. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You know, you don't have to carry the weight of the galaxy alone," he said quietly. "You don't have to do this by yourself, not anymore." For the first time in her life, Vera felt a lump rise in her throat. She had never needed anyone, never allowed anyone to be close enough to help, but with Kale, it was different. She didn't know why, but she felt a deep longing for something more, something that she had spent her entire life avoiding. She knew she couldn't fight it anymore, not with him. "I don't want to be weak," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale's gaze softened, and he took another step closer, his presence overwhelming, but not in a threatening way. It was comforting. "You're not weak," he said, his voice low and steady. "Being strong doesn't mean doing everything on your own. Sometimes it means trusting someone else to help, to stand by your side, to be there when you need them." Vera's heart raced. She wanted to argue, to push him away, but something inside her told her to listen, told her to accept the truth. Maybe for the first time in her life, it wasn't about strength, it wasn't about power, it was about connection, about sharing the weight of the world with someone else. And as Kale stood before her, his eyes filled with kindness and understanding, she couldn't deny it any longer. She was falling for him. The queen, the ruler, the alien who had always believed she was untouchable, was starting to believe in something more, something beyond herself. Kale was not just a human mate, he was her partner, her equal, and as much as she fought it, as much as she tried to resist, she couldn't ignore what was blooming inside her heart. Kale reached out, his hand brushing against hers. The simple touch sent a jolt through her, and for the first time, Vera allowed herself to feel vulnerable, to let him in. She looked into his eyes, and in that moment, everything changed. There was no more doubt, no more hesitation. There was only Kale, and there was only her, together, standing side by side. "We're in this together, Vera," Kale said, his voice full of certainty. "We always will be." And for the first time in a long time, Vera believed him. The truth revealed. The peaceful quiet of the garden soon shattered, the sound of heavy footsteps breaking the calm air as Vera and Kale stood facing one another, the weight of their connection still fresh between them, but the world outside their bubble of silence was far from still. News had arrived. There was another attack, a more dangerous one. This time, the enemy wasn't just a few ships or rogue mercenaries. It was the one force Vera had been dreading for years, a force that had once nearly destroyed her. People, the Draconian Empire, a brutal, unyielding race of conquerors who thrived on fear and destruction. They were back, and this time, they had a new weapon, one that even Vera had no knowledge of, and that was the truth she had been trying to ignore, the truth that the galaxy was not as safe as she had believed. Vera's heart sank as the news hit her. The Draconians were closing in fast. Their fleet was massive, far larger than anything the galaxy had seen in years. It was only a matter of time before they arrived at her doorstep, and with them, they brought a new weapon, something that could break through even her strongest defenses, something that could destroy everything she had fought for, everything she had ever known. As she turned to Kale, ready to take charge and prepare for the worst, he stepped forward, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. The touch was small, but it sent a ripple through her, a reminder that she was no longer alone. "We'll face this together," he said quietly. "You don't have to do it by yourself, not anymore." Vera stared at him, 1,000 thoughts racing through her mind. She had always been the one in control, the one making the hard decisions, the one who carried the responsibility for everything. But now, with Kale beside her, with his quiet strength and unwavering support, she felt something shift, something inside her that told her it was okay to rely on someone else. It was okay to lean on him when the weight became too much. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. The Draconian fleet arrived within hours, their ships descending like vultures on a wounded prey. The palace was prepared, but Vera knew that what lay ahead was unlike anything she had faced before. This wasn't just a battle, it was a war, a fight for survival, and she had to make sure her people were ready. As the battle began, the air filled with the sound of weapons firing, ships exploding in the sky above, and the ground shaking with every impact. Vera's mind was clear, her focus sharp. But she couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling in her chest. The Draconians were unlike any enemies she had ever fought before, and this time, they had something new. As Vera led her forces into battle, Kale was right beside her, his presence reassuring, and yet, there was something different about him now, something that Vera couldn't quite place. As they fought side by side, he moved with a fluidity she hadn't seen before, his every action precise and calculated. It was like he was one with the battlefield. And as the enemy began to fall, she realized something. Something she hadn't allowed herself to consider. Kale was not just her partner, he was her equal, in every way, and more, he was the key to saving her people. Vera's eyes widened as she watched him fight. His power was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Each strike he made sent shockwaves through the enemy's forces, tearing apart their ships, their defenses. He wasn't just a human, he was something more. Something she couldn't fully understand, but she didn't need to, not anymore. Kale was the one who had the power to change everything, and as the battle raged on, Vera realized the truth. Kale wasn't just her mate, he was the one who could turn the tide of this war, and that realization hit her harder than anything else. But then, just as the battle seemed to be tipping in their favor, the ground beneath them shook violently. The Draconians had unleashed their secret weapon, a massive creature, one that had been bred to destroy, to crush everything in its path. It was unlike anything Vera had ever seen. Its skin was like armor, its eyes glowing with a fiery rage, and its roar could shake the heavens themselves. Vera knew this was it. This was the moment that would decide everything, and as she prepared to face the creature head-on, Kale stepped forward, his face unreadable, his body tense. "Stay back," Vera ordered, "I'll take care of this." Kale's eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, she saw something different in them, a burning determination, and then, without warning, he moved, faster than Vera could react. He was already facing the creature, his body surrounded by an intense energy that made the air crackle with power. "No," Vera said, panic rising in her chest, "you can't." But it was too late. Kale had already struck, and with a single blow, the creature was thrown backward, its massive form crashing to the ground, dead before it even hit the earth. Vera stood frozen, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. She had never seen anything like it. Kale's power was beyond her comprehension, it was beyond anything she had ever believed possible, and as he turned back to her, the air around him shimmering with energy, Vera couldn't deny it any longer. Kale was not just her mate, he was the one who could save them all. A new alliance. The battle had ended, the Draconian threat was neutralized, but the war had left its mark on the galaxy, and Vera knew that this was only the beginning. Her thoughts were swirling, as was the endless sea of emotions inside her. Kale had proven his strength in ways no one, not even her, had imagined. She could no longer deny the truth. He was far more than just a human mate, he was an essential force, a partner who could shape the fate of their people. As the palace was rebuilt and the warships returned to their stations, the atmosphere in the kingdom was heavy with both relief and the recognition of the challenges that still lay ahead. Vera stood in her royal chamber, staring out over the horizon. The weight of leadership was ever present, and the more she thought about the future, the more uncertain it seemed. She wasn't sure where this new path with Kale would lead, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't face the coming storm without him by her side. Kale had become an integral part of her life, but more than that, he had become a symbol of the future, one that represented a new era, one that defied the old boundaries, the divisions between species, and the lines drawn by history. In the short time they had known each other, Vera had learned more about herself than she ever expected. She had discovered a side of herself that she had locked away for years: vulnerability, compassion, trust. But it wasn't just the emotional connection that had changed everything. It was Kale's presence, his quiet strength, and the fact that he was unlike any warrior she had ever known. His power was not the only reason he was a key to victory. It was his unwavering sense of justice, his belief in unity, and his willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause greater than himself. The war might have ended for now, but Vera knew that the galaxy was far from peaceful. The Draconians were only one of many forces that lurked in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike again. There was so much more to be done, so many alliances to be forged, and so many enemies to face, but for the first time, Vera felt hope. One evening, as they gathered in the war room, Vera turned to Kale, who stood beside her, looking over the latest reports from their allies, his expression focused, yet calm, a sharp contrast to the weight of the responsibility Vera felt pressing down on her shoulders. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, her voice almost uncertain. She wasn't used to feeling unsure, to needing someone else's input, but with Kale, it was different. She trusted him in ways she couldn't explain. Kale glanced at her, his eyes meeting hers, filled with both strength and something softer, something that made her heart race. "Now, we take what we've learned, what we've built together, and we start uniting the galaxy," he said, his voice steady. "This battle was just the first step, but there are more to come, and I know that if we stand together, we can protect everything we've fought for. We don't have to do it alone, not anymore." Vera looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. She had never felt more connected to another being, never more sure that this, what they had, was not just a chance, it was fate. They had a purpose now, a mission to make the galaxy a place where peace could thrive, where no one would have to live in fear, and the thought of it filled her with a new sense of determination. But as they made their plans, a new sense of urgency filled the room. Vera's mind raced as she considered the other factions and threats in the galaxy. She couldn't afford to take her eyes off the bigger picture, not when there were still so many unknowns. But Kale, ever patient, simply placed a hand on her arm, grounding her. "We will face whatever comes next, together," he said quietly. "You don't have to bear this alone, Vera." For a moment, Vera allowed herself to lean into his words, to feel the weight lift just slightly from her shoulders, and as they stood there, together, she realized something that made her heart swell with pride. Kale had not only become her mate, he had become the partner she had never known she needed, the one who would stand by her through anything. Vera's eyes softened, and she nodded. "We will," she said with a calm determination, a certainty that had grown inside her, knowing that this was only the beginning of their journey together, a journey to reshape the future of the galaxy, and as long as Kale stood by her side, she knew they would succeed. The ultimate test. The days after their decision to unite the galaxy felt heavy with the weight of purpose. Vera and Kale knew they had a long road ahead. The Draconians might have been defeated, but there were still far greater threats looming in the darkness, threats that no one, not even the most seasoned warriors, could predict. The galaxy was a vast place, full of secrets, and not all of them were friendly. Vera spent every waking moment preparing for what was to come, working tirelessly with her council and allies, strengthening their defenses and forging new alliances. Yet, even as the preparations progressed, a strange tension settled between them, a feeling that something was coming, something far worse than anything they had faced before. It was a feeling that gnawed at her every time she saw Kale, every time their eyes met across the war room table, the silence between them heavy with unspoken understanding. Kale, ever perceptive, had noticed it too, though he never said anything. He simply stood by her, a steady force in the storm. But as the days wore on, the unease between them grew. They had seen the power that lurked in the shadows of the galaxy, and now it seemed to be closing in faster than ever. One evening, as Vera walked through the palace corridors, she overheard a conversation that froze her in her tracks. Two of her trusted generals were speaking in hushed tones, but the words were clear: the ancient enemy has awakened. The Endless Ones are coming. Vera's heart skipped a beat. The Endless Ones were the stuff of legends, ancient beings so powerful, so ruthless, that their very names sent chills through the hearts of even the bravest warriors. No one had heard of them for centuries, and no one had ever seen them. But the stories whispered in the darkest corners of the galaxy, told of creatures so mighty they could bend the fabric of reality itself, capable of destroying entire worlds with a single thought. Vera's mind raced as the weight of the situation hit her. She couldn't just prepare her forces for the inevitable, she had to act. If the Endless Ones were truly returning, the entire galaxy would be at risk. There was no time to waste, no time for hesitation. She immediately sought out Kale, finding him standing on the balcony overlooking the palace grounds, the darkened sky stretching endlessly above them. She stood there for a moment, watching him in silence, before stepping forward, her voice urgent: "Kale, we need to talk." Kale turned, his eyes meeting hers, his expression unreadable, yet she could see the hint of concern flickering there. "What's wrong?" "The Endless Ones," she said, her voice low, but steady, "they've awakened. The legends, they're real. We need to prepare. We don't have much time." Kale's eyes narrowed, the weight of her words sinking in. "The Endless Ones? I thought they were just stories, myths." "They're not," Vera replied, "and I fear that our worst fears are about to come true. The galaxy is not ready for this." Kale's gaze softened as he stepped closer, his presence a calming force against the growing storm in her chest. "We'll face them together," he said, his voice full of conviction. "Whatever they throw at us, we'll be ready." Vera felt a pang in her chest at his words. She had always been the one in control, always the one who led with a cool, calculated mind. But now, standing beside Kale, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this time, it wasn't just about being strong. It wasn't about her alone. It was about the two of them, working together to face the unimaginable. The tension between them, the unease they had both felt, finally made sense. It wasn't just the weight of the galaxy that pressed on their shoulders, it was the realization that they were entering a battle that neither of them could fight alone. The Endless Ones were coming, and for the first time, Vera wasn't sure how they would win. She didn't know if the galaxy could survive the kind of power the Endless Ones wielded, but one thing was certain: she wasn't going to face it without Kale by her side. The final stand. The final battle arrived faster than anyone had anticipated. The Endless Ones were not just a single entity, they were a collective of beings, each one more powerful than the last. Their ships arrived without warning, dark and ominous, casting shadows across the entire galaxy. The skies were filled with the sound of their arrival, and their power rippled through the stars like a storm. The battle for the galaxy had begun. Vera and Kale stood at the forefront of the defense, side by side, as their forces prepared for what was about to unfold. The galaxy was no longer divided. United by the bond between them, Vera and Kale had gathered armies from every corner of the universe. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future. The Endless Ones attacked relentlessly, their forces tearing through the defenses like paper. Each one was more powerful than anything they had ever encountered, and yet, Kale's strength was unmatched. Vera watched in awe as he moved through the battlefield, his power growing with each strike, each attack, and each enemy he brought down. But even Kale could not stop the endless tide. The battle raged on, and it was clear that the Endless Ones were not here to negotiate, they were here to destroy. Then, just when it seemed like all was lost, Kale turned to her, his eyes burning with intensity. "We need to end this, now." Vera understood. There was no more room for hesitation. They would have to take the fight to the heart of the Endless One's power. Together, they fought their way through the endless waves, finally reaching the core of the Endless One's fleet. It was a place beyond reality itself, a pocket of existence where the laws of time and space didn't apply. Here, Kale's power surged to its peak, and Vera, with all the strength of her people, stood beside him. In the final moments, as they faced the core of the Endless One's power, they knew this was their only chance. Their power combined was the galaxy's last hope. With a final, unified strike, they shattered the heart of the Endless One's control, and in that moment, everything changed. The galaxy was free.